Welcome back to the Talent to Learning Show podcast series, episode 53 with independent learning tech analyst John Lay. Today I interview Blake Proberts, managing director and founder of the Acorn LMS, the fastest growing LMS in Australia, about the state of LMS and e-learning down under. You can find more of our fiercely independent content at talenttololearning.com. Welcome back, listeners, to the Talent to Learning Show podcast. On this show, I'm fortunate to interview the world's leading experts in extended enterprise learning solutions from both the vendor and the practitioner perspectives. Today is no different. From the vendor expert side, my guest is blazing his own path through the Australian outback and the greater Asia-Pac area, landing and forever maintaining LMS clients big and small. Do Australians utilize the LMS? What type of companies, industries are leading the way? What are the biggest challenges? What about content and technology? Well, we're going to find out from an expert. Blake, welcome to the Talent to Learning Show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much, John, for having me on and taking the time to have a bit of a chat.
Oh, I'm excited. And the reason being is, at Talented Learning, we get, a significant amount of traffic coming from Asia Pac and Australia in general, but we haven't really met anybody until yourselves that's from there, that has grown up there, has grown a company from nothing there, and has attacked the learning space really by putting your ear to the ground and listening to your customers and kind of almost building in a vacuum based on your market. All your competition is coming from somewhere else that's trying to penetrate into that market. And I thought for a long time, this would be a great podcast interview to just dig into the Australian market, learn about your solution, but learn about the market in general, the challenges, the solutions in there, the type of industries, and let's dig in deep and let's learn about what's going on down under. So
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, you're kind of like Australia's almost Bill Gates, with a unique personal story, starting with college. Why don't you tell us about who you are and a little bit about your story of how you founded Pursuit Technologies and the Acorn LMS, and let's start there, and we'll start to begin.
Yeah, sure. So. How do we start? Well, basically, myself and my best mate from high school, so we've known each other since we're about 12 or so. We essentially took an opportunity to build some websites really early on when we were at university, and we sort of were poking around. I actually ran a pub, and I was plugging in that audio-visual equipment for a fella, and he said, "Hey, you're pretty good at that. Can you build me a website?" And I was like, "Well, this is completely unrelated, but yeah, absolutely, I'll give it a crack." And so we ended up doing that, and then started actually building a few different websites just for family and friends at the start, and sort of ended up having a bit of a little business building websites and mobile apps and things like that. And from that, sort of, we looked around and weren't really getting what we wanted out of university. And at the time, what we wanted from uni was a job. So we sort of thought, hey, we're doing this already. Like, why are we paying a lot of money to learn how to do this when we're kind of doing this? And so I ended up dropping out of university, and we continued to sort of build those apps and websites until one day we had a public servant in Canberra engage us to build an app. And he sort of said, hey, you guys are pretty good at this stuff. Have you ever thought about learning management systems? And we were sort of like, yeah, absolutely. We know plenty about those, and we're more than happy to have a crack at this. And he sort of was like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Look, there's a few tenders coming out. Maybe you guys should put in for one. And so we did, and we ended up putting in for a tender. I believe our first one was the New South Wales Police Force here. So New South Wales is a state, and essentially what happened was we won. And then we had to build a system. So we ended up having a look around at the market, and we sort of thought, hey, these are pretty lackluster. And don't get me wrong, the market's very different now. There's some fantastic systems.
Tell the truth, Blake. Tell the truth.
Yeah.
That's what you think.
But there just wasn't, and they were archaic. And my favorite saying for this is it's like the land that time forgot, and it was weird. You sort of started to get UX and UI be nice, and LMSs were just not very nice to use. So we ended up sort of putting one together that probably didn't have all the functionality and everything that other systems had, but it was really easy to use, and we really cared. So when people called, it was literally us. We would pick up the phone and we would go, yeah, what's the problem? We'll fix it. And that ethos sort of has stayed with us. So we're about 8 years old now, give or take. And since that first client came on board, within 12 months, we were servicing about 36 government agencies, here, federal agencies. And we ended up keeping all of those, and we have 100% client retention, 100% client satisfaction, 15-minute average response time at the moment to our support desk. And that's sort of how we grew. So we just grew very organically until probably the last couple of years, give or take, where we started to look at re-engineering the system, really started to build outside of that vacuum, like you mentioned earlier, and sort of poke our heads around. But we've really grown our system from asking our clients, like, hey, what do you guys want? What do you need? Looking at their problems, working out, is that just a symptom, or is that the actual problem? And then starting to build features and functionality to sort of diagnose and solve those, and have sort of grown to where we are today. So we've got about, give or take, we do about 1 million users last year. So that's where we're sitting, a little bit over. So yeah, it's come a long way, and a lot of battle scars and tissue from that. But yeah, we're really really proud of where we've come from.
Awesome. Well, that's a great start. You mentioned a lot about federal agencies or agencies in general, and the state of their. Let's come back to that in just a moment if we have time, and look at the corporate side, where we spent a lot of time here at Talented Learning focusing on the corporate side of the market. What was the state of the corporate market, I guess, a few years ago, before the pandemic, and now? Tell us, like, do all companies have learning management systems? Are companies buying their first learning? Are you still trying to build the business case? Like, where are you as inside of the corporations there in terms of the acceptance and adoption of learning management technologies?
Yeah, I think over probably the past 5 years, it's ramped up quite a lot. I think that it used to be quite common for them to not have any system when we would get engaged by someone and sort of be like, hey, we don't have anything, and we're sort of looking for something. But the pandemic really escalated that. So if someone didn't have a system, they probably started to look, because, to be honest, and sadly, the compliance training often drives that. And essentially they've gone, okay, well, everybody's remote, but we still need to do this compliance. How can we sort of escalate that or make that happen remotely from the pandemic? However, that being said, I think it also made people really look at their tech stack and go, okay, we're trying to deliver to a remote workforce now more than ever. And in order to be able to do that, we actually need like pretty good technology, and we want our people to have a really good experience, whether that be onboarding, professional development, and compliance, whatever it might be. And I think that's really escalated things over here. And people have stopped sort of taking those systems for granted, or sort of going, okay, we're going to do some general compliance, and that's what we're going to use our LMS for. And it's sort of turned into much more of an employee value proposition. And I think as the rate of change has increased, organizations are starting to see, hey, we actually really need to train our people. And with such a high rate of change, all the stuff that they knew last year, it's changing rapidly now. So as opposed to transforming, I think organizations are starting to sort of realize, hey, we just need to stay current, and we need to be a bit better at staying current, and making sure that all of the things that we need to accomplish and achieve, we don't get too far behind, so that we need to come and bring everybody up to a sort of standard. So I think that the market it's evolved a lot, and it's changed quite a lot because of the pandemic. But I think it just accelerated what was going to happen anyway, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think everywhere across the world, it probably had that same trend. So what about from a use case on the corporate side or the commercial side? Is the focus right now employee solutions? So developing your employees, like you've talked about. Is there interest in developing or I guess activity in customer education, for example, or training people outside of your walls, but still part of your extended enterprise? What's the current state of that, and is that changing in your opinion?
I think customer training is exploding, to be completely honest. I think reaching outside of the organization and training other stakeholders is something that wasn't really at the forefront, but now is very, very quickly becoming the forefront. I think that employee training is obviously critical, really important, and organizations are doing it. But I think that what they've realized is, hey, if we spend a few hours training some of our customers, we actually don't need to do all these other things. And the ROI there is it's very easy to calculate, and it's very transparent. And so the argument can be made very easily internally to do that. I think that explosion is led by the Great Resignation. It's so hard to get staff at the moment, and so you don't want to spend as much time supporting and doing all these other things if we can train our clients to really understand our products and our systems and services. I think the market's moving towards a self-service. People just kind of want to do it themselves now. They didn't always want to do that back in the day, but now they want a self-service, and more importantly, I think the organization really wants them to self-service as much as possible. So I think that area we've just seen absolute explosion of growth. We're working with a drone company to map mines and things like that, and train people how to use their drones. And we sort of spoke to them a while ago and said, hey, is this, you guys have been around for a little while, why is this so new? And they were like, well, we've realized with COVID and all these other things, we can't send an instructor out to train you how to use this, to $20,000, $30,000 drone that we've got to fly around a mine. So we've got to build these remote solutions. And then they did it, and they were like, oh, we don't have to fly trainers around. This is awesome. Let's do more of this, and so they've started to sort of build on that. So we're starting to see it in industries outside of software a lot more, I think. Whereas employee training, I believe at the moment it's much more around retention, keeping your staff because it's so competitive in the market, but also giving them clear growth and career pathways to sort of incentivize them to stay. People generally don't want to just sit there and spin like a cog in a machine. They want to grow, and they want to learn new things and experience new things. So I think that's the sort of tack that's starting to take. But the rate of uptake of customer training is just it's wild.
Wow, excellent. Well, that's great to hear, because of course we care a lot about that over here, as that's the fastest growing segment in the United States marketplace also is customer training. So it's neat to see that. Mark, what I didn't realize is because I am an American, I think inside all the time, but I didn't realize that Great Resignation applied all over the world. That was the same over in Australia, and that you're dealing with that same shortage of workers. That's an interesting business parallel. There.
We have the tightest labor market we've had in 50 years. So wow. It's Australia. So I think our unemployment rate is it's sort of below sort of 3%, which is that it's too good. There's no people to do anything. It's too good.
Well, whenever it's too good, it's great for our industry, because when it's about retaining and growing folks, then it's really when our industry shines. What about from a content perspective? So I would think that, well, maybe we'll take another step there. How about just bandwidth in general? What's the state of bandwidth and mobile and the implications of learning and online learning content there? Tell us what's going on, what the challenges are, if there are some.
Yeah, I think the main thing with online learning and the challenges that sort of crop up is it becomes very hard to apply context to things, because you're completely removed from the situation. So in terms of the bandwidth and how much time people have, I think that's always going to just be a bit of a struggle. And I think we need to do a better job of showing people the value of doing this training and making the training good. If the training's bad, which it can be, and we've seen plenty of terrible training, people don't want to do it. So bandwidth is a really easy reason to give as to why you can't complete something. If the training's really good, I think the next problem is sort of the context. And we're going to take you out of this environment. We're going to make you do training online or something like that. And if you work in a factory or in a mine or something like that, it's really noisy. It's really different, and there's all sorts of things happening. So I think it becomes very difficult to put the right context into play when people are conducting that training remotely. I think that becomes quite challenging and difficult. I think in terms of the overall sort of workforce and bandwidth, I think the training and giving good opportunities is becoming more or less expected. and that people will complete them if the value proposition is there. They'll actually seek them out, I think, and we're sort of big believers in, okay, like we've got all of this training, but we want to actually show you the impact of doing these things and why you want to do these things. And if you've got a bit of a career pathway that you want to achieve, here are some things that might help you do it. And then we want you to learn. You decide when to learn and how to learn, as opposed to the organization sort of pushing that onto you. So I think those two things probably, are my answer to that.
Mm-hmm. And how about from a technology bandwidth, the other half of the bandwidth question is internet bandwidth a challenge currently in Australia or no? And delivering it to mobile solutions, or is that something you have to worry about?
Yeah, sometimes it is. So Australia's massive, right? So it's the size of the States with 22 million people. So there's a lot of really remote areas, and they can be very hard to deliver to. And it's what we've found is it's not so much even the bandwidth per se. Not that it's great, to be completely honest. It's the stability of the connection in a remote area. And that intermittent the dropping in and out of a connection, even if it's small enough that when you watch a video you wouldn't notice. With learning, it can be very tricky, because if you progress or you submit answers to something, like let's say you're doing a quiz and you submit an answer and that bandwidth has dropped out, that can cause like tremendous issues with most like SCORM content or like eLearning style content. So it can be a challenge. And to get around that, you sort of want to provide an option for the user to download that to a local device while they're on a stable connection or something like that, so that they can complete that content without necessarily needing to rely on that connection in real time. In our major metropolitan areas, internet's it's pretty good. It's funny. Our 5G in Canberra is better than our broadband, so I get like 500 megabytes down on my phone through nothing, which blew my mind when it happened. But our sort of normal bandwidth would sort of cap out at probably like 80 or 100. So enough and stable enough to be quick enough for most users. But in the remote areas, really tricky. And we've got to put solutions in place to sort of allow them to be able to consume that content from a localized device, as opposed to pulling it down from the cloud in real time, because it can just have issues.
And how do you do that? Do you do that through a mobile app, or is it just right through the LMS to be able to download that file?
Yeah, mobile app is generally the best way, just because that they can, we can give them files to download through the LMS, but if we're trying to track like engagement, completion statistics, things like that, we really need that to run locally on a device. So as an example, the best use case I could probably say for this is completely different. People in like the Navy go on submarines and boats, and there's nothing out there. There's absolutely nothing out there. And so they actually download that training onto a device, go offline and go and complete it. And the same is true for the sort of really rural workers, which we can have a lot of, out here. So even though they are remote, it's not like there's not many of them. There's a lot. And so we found a mobile app where you can download the course, complete that course in your own time, regardless of connectivity. And then when you get back to a stable internet sort of connection or region, it can take its time to upload, and having an intermittent connection or a slow connection is not going to affect your overall experience.
Interesting. So there's one thing about doing business in your part of the world that's different is there's certainly solutions that can download content, but they're really in the minority. It's really a mobile responsive only approach here, which works great in most of the U.S. and certainly in metropolitan areas, but it doesn't work certainly in any remote areas or down underneath the ocean.
That's right.
for that, what are your thoughts on customers creating their own content in 2022? Their own proprietary learning versus off-the-shelf learning. What's the trends that you're seeing in Australia?
Yeah, so we probably find a little bit of a combination of the two for the majority of our clients. So normally what we will see is you can probably get maybe 80, 90%, depending on what you do, of the way there with all of your normal business areas and whatnot, with your Go ones and your LinkedIn Learnings and your big off-the-shelf providers and your small off-the-shelf providers too, don't get me wrong. But you can get a long way there. However, there's generally like a little bit of a gap, and where we see that gap again is in the contextualization. So, if we're going to onboard you to our organization, we want you to know a lot about like our values and how we work, and the little things that sort of might make a little bit of a difference for you during your journey at the workplace. So we sort of see a combination of the two. And in particular, if somebody has something quite unique, so if they're building something or developing something that's completely different to the rest of the world, there's probably no content out there for them. So what we see is it's about getting those subject matter experts in the room with somebody who can help them formulate that content and maybe tell a bit of a story around how they build and develop those things, and then create that and supplement it a little bit with Excel as an example. So I was talking to the guys at Go1 the other day. Their number one search term every year since their inception has been Excel training. There's a lot of Excel training there. You probably don't want to build Excel training. You don't need to give crazy context because you're in Excel. It is what it is. Sure. So I think off the shelf is really good for those things. But as soon as you got to start to contextualize things, or there's a risk of things being a little bit boring, might I add, like cybersecurity training can often be a little bit boring, but it's so important. And I think it's good to maybe contextualize that to say, hey, that, these things have happened, and this is why there might be a concern or an issue here. So yeah, we probably find like a combination is where most people are landing at the moment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And tools like we're using right now, Zoom or Teams or WebEx, what are the most popular ones being used and integrated right now with your clients?
Yeah, easily Teams. Like I can say that without skipping a beat. So Microsoft Teams is by far the most used tool that we see in the video conferencing space. I think that it started to sort of cannibalize and eat a lot of the other tools like WebEx. Zoom, we probably see a lot more in corporate and private, but I'd say Teams probably still dominates. And I think honestly that's solely just because it is a good product. It works really well. It has a lot of integrations, but it also comes with the Microsoft suite. So you end up kind of not wanting to double up on having other technology stacks because most people have the Microsoft suite for Word and Office and all these other things. So it becomes a little bit easier just to go, oh, well, we already got Teams. Let's just pop it on.
Just use that.
And then I would say in the software space, Slack just absolutely smashes it. So we see so much work done on Slack and companies working with Slack in the IT and software sector.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Give us a use case of using Slack with the LMS.
Yeah, so let's say you've registered on a wait list and you want to know when somebody drops off a course so that you can take a place on that. Slack can just ping you and say, hey, look, a place has popped up on this course that you're registered on. Do you want to just jump in and see if it works for you, if it doesn't work for you? But also things like any compliance training, really, really good for, hey, you've got 3 months, here's the list of courses. Then in another month, hey, just letting you know, this is creeping up on you. So it's sort of putting it much more in the flow of work as opposed to the user having to go and seek that. Or people we get enough emails and whatnot. So it's kind of nice to get pinged in maybe a slightly different way. I think you get a little bit of a higher engagement. Or if we really know what you do and what you're learning about and what you want to learn, and there's new content, we might put a digest together at the start of the month and say, hey, here are all the things you're interested in. Here's all of the new content that not only we have in the LMS and your organizations put together, but also it's these other third-party providers put together as well that you have access to. And we can maybe give you some inspiration of some things that you might want to jump on and consume.
Wow, cool. And does that work? Does that work administratively then? So, from within your platform, then you set up all the if-then rules to populate the team push messages or the Zoom push messages? Is that how you would do that? Or differently?
So essentially when you're configuring, like if it's notifications, when you're configuring those notifications, they'll just link into something like Teams and you'll be able to choose when and how and what they say and all those kinds of things. And then if it's sort of like a one-off push or a broadcast kind of message, that would be exactly that, a one-off push in the LMS that would then broadcast out. And then in terms of digest and whatnot, absolutely there's something you configure. So generally these are things that work with an organization to sort of configure and get right, because once they're done, they're sort of in place and maybe we'll tweak them and whatnot over time. But once we get those rules in place, they can be a little bit of time to set up, but once they're set up, they're really, really impactful.
Yeah, neat. That's something. It sounds you're further along on, and we certainly see some teams in Zoom integration, but I haven't seen great use cases. So it looks like it's still in the early stage. So it sounds like you're leading some path there. We're almost out of time, and it always goes like this because these interviews are so quick. So how about some rapid fire? Preference between SaaS or on premise in Australia?
SaaS.
It's definitely SaaS. No chance. Yeah. Okay.
Let's just do the security conscious SaaS. Yeah.
Any special security or certifications or things that you require from a technical or infrastructure standpoint to deploy solutions on Australia? Is there unique standards that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So in government, IRAP is our gold standard. That's based off like the US FedRAMP. Outside of that, then you'd move to more international standards. So like your ISO 2700s and your SOC 1 and 2. Yeah.
All right, cool. And what do you think is on the horizon? This doesn't have to be rapid. What do you think is on the horizon for the what's next in Australia? Like, where do you think this is going? 3 years from now, I guess. Not too far out.
Yeah, so we hear a lot about mapping your training to capability, and that's where we're sort of spending quite a lot of time. So essentially, baselining the organization, we think that's a good place for a baseline of skills and capability to live is within the LMS. So we want to baseline our organization and work out what the capabilities are, and then we want to map those training opportunities to those strategically impactful capabilities from a business perspective. So we sort of see L&D going towards an area where you take the business strategy, and that is your learning strategy. Really, we need people that can do these things, and that's where we think it's going. Not Nostradamus.
We'll get you back in a couple of years here. We'll test you. I think you're right though, because it's really the flip side of the solution to the Great Resignation. So by aligning this with companies, that allows these employees to grow through those paths, like you were talking about, in a way that's strategic to the organization. So it's kind of like bringing all the stories together as a way to close that gap, in my opinion. Absolutely. So that's pretty cool, and I think that's a global trend also that we see. All right, final question: if you are in Australia right now and you're in the process of thinking about your first learning management system, what's your best advice for an organization like that still hasn't made the leap, or maybe they bought something on the international market that's not quite meeting it and they're ready to get into their second? Do you have any advice? You see clients like that all the time. What's your best advice to help somebody out like that?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is really think about the support that you're going to get if it's your first LMS or the organization isn't experienced with one, because that's really going to make or break your product. Like our product, I think is great, but I know that if it's not supported correctly, it can easily be terrible. And I think that's across the board with these products. If you don't have a lot of experience, so really think about the team that you're working with. How much time they're going to spend with you, and is that going to be something that is an upfront thing that then disappears, or is this an ongoing sort of relationship with that sort of vendor? And I would pick something that you can grow into, because changing systems is horrible, and no one likes doing it, right? So I think pick a system that has probably more than you need, but you're going to use those things later, or the direction of the system is the same as your organization, because I think that once you get into a system, sometimes it can be very tricky to get out of them.
Wow, sage advice. Blake Proberts, Managing Director and Founder of Acorn LMS. I also concur, about that. What time is it local for you right now in Canberra?
7:34.
7:34 a.m. and it's 5:33 p.m. here in Eastern Pennsylvania. And so there's just an education. If you're in Australia and you're buying a system, that team, that support, the hours of support, how you're going to be able to certainly, work within your own time zone is important, because it's, all but a 12-hour, in a lot of cases, a 12-hour turnaround to other parts of the world. So that's a hidden gem, really, that I think people forget in lieu of fancy technology. So good advice there. So, Blake, it was great having you on today. I learned a ton of stuff that I didn't know, and I had never had a chance to ask you before. So it was enlightening to me. I'm sure our audience here learned a lot too about the state of the global learning market and how it's the same and different in Australia. And so thank you very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to have you, and I hope to have you back on the show soon and get your updates both from a personal and business standpoint, but also from a market standpoint. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much for your time and taking the time late afternoon for you to have a bit of a chat.
Yeah, awesome. Well, it was worth it. It was worth it. Listeners, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Towns of Learning podcast series. We hope to see you on the next, and you can find more of our independent resources, fiercely independent resources at talentedlearning.com. Have a great day, everyone.